We're located here midway between Bluffton and Pandora at the Schumacher homestead, and the date is September 14th, 2013. I'm Ron Laura, a board member of the Society, and I want to thank our interpretation committee, Rachel Friesen, Judy Hilty, and Jan Emmert for planning the session, and Joanne Nicewander, and for planning this session and coming up with questions that might be appropriate here for discussion. Old farm buildings are a monument to a vanishing American. I think barns in particular hold our interest because of their aesthetic beauty, especially when seen from inside. But it was much more than that. They were in harmony with the way of life that was dominant in the late 19th century. To talk about our barn, its construction and use, we've invited Keith Summer to speak with us. Keith is a member of the Friends of Ohio Barns Association. He's visited a good many Ohio barns, and he's also a board member. And Keith, we say welcome to you. And maybe we could begin with the construction of the barn here to my right.
Okay, the present Christian Schumacher barn was built in 1854. We have very good evidence of that from the date stone on the north side of the downstairs foundation at the east end. Most barns do not have date stones on them, so we are very fortunate to have it. There has always been speculation why it was built the way it was. Schumacher had ideas how he wanted his barn to be built in contrast to the way barns were built in the community at the same time. This barn has gable entry banks originally where you could drive in one gable end and in to the barn to unload hay, fodder, bundles of wheat, straw, whatever, and drive out the other end. This barn has been noted in a publication known for its information on Pennsylvania-style barns, noting that it is a very rare form of barn in the state of Ohio, especially one that has its banks removed and alternative location, in this case on the south side. Also, we might note that the barn location is a long ways from the house. There are several factors that can contribute to where it is now. A good place would be east of the house, where the barn would be downwind from the smells of the barn, but the problem with having it east of the house is there's not enough room there between the house and Riley Creek and what probably was Zerflew Road coming through there at that time. Another reason for being this far is there were other buildings in between the present house and the present barn. This barn I would consider number 2 barn, not number 1 barn. There would have been a log barn in between this existing barn and the existing house, and it would be somewhere probably, I'm guessing, even east of the hog house over here somewhere. So if you're going to build a new barn, you don't want to tear down the old barn before you build the new barn. You have to have some place to do your regular farm chores, storage, threshing, that sort of thing. And another thing is, you don't want to put a barn right here. This is sort of a natural waterway here. When it rains real hard and the ground is saturated, you have water running through here. So this is sort of a natural waterway here. So over here would be a more logical place where it's drier and you're not interrupting with the existence of the pre-existing log buildings, which would have been here before the present timber frame barn was built. Any questions at this point?
I grew up 2 miles to the west of here directly, and I looked at the number of barns. 2 have come down, but I'm counting them. And 3 of the barns were located north or south of the house. 4 of the barns were east of the house, and 7 of the barns were to the west. And as a boy who grew up at a farm and know what the prevailing winds are, and they didn't have Riley Creek, I wonder why so many barns were to the west. It's still a curious question to me. I was always glad that our barn was to the east.
Where I live, my barn is also west of the house.
Yeah.
And it's 1850s barn, 1854 house.
Yeah. Okay. You know, at this point, unless there's a question here, there is over here.
The first barn was log?
Yes, it was a log.
Log barn?
Yes. And I have a picture in the barn of a log barn that was here in the community, which would have been typical probably of the barn that was here. Christian Schumacher seemed to be a person that thought on a large scale. I mean, he built a large house. He bought about 250 acres of ground initially. He came with definite ideas of what he was going to do when he settled here. At least that's what it seems to me. So he built a barn that was fairly large. There were some larger barns built than this, but not very many. So anyway, yes, there would have been a log barn here, and it would have been at least what we call a double crib log barn, which means you have 2 separate square areas that are enclosed with log walls. You have a dog trot or a aisleway in between big enough for threshing, and that would have been the style of barn that he probably would have had here initially. Right, that was built probably late 1850s, I'm guessing.
Jan, you want to repeat your question?
Keith, you mentioned about the hog barn.
My best guess is late 1850s, judging from the size of the timbers in it. I know it was built later because the lumber in there was sawed on a circular saw instead of a reciprocating saw. The reason I'm saying that is around the middle 1850s, the sawing technology changed from the reciprocating saw style to the circular saw style.
And Keith, while we're still here, what about this building also?
Yeah, this is the corn crib here. This is probably early 20th century. And it is a timber frame building. Timber frame buildings were built probably as late as the 1940s, excuse me, in this community, according to discussions I've had with contractors in the community. An example of a late timber frame barn would be where Art Hildy lived. That bank barn there was built in 1929 after the previous barn was destroyed from a lightning storm.
We can begin again. Keith, 2 distinct questions related. Did this land here, in your estimation, have to be cleared first? And then when they built the barn, where did all the materials come from? If you want to talk about that.
Okay, I would say this area was cleared because they would have cleared it for farming purposes, so there would have been a few acres cleared from the time they started living here. We don't know how much Thomas Gray cleared, but I'm assuming when the Schumachers came here in 35, 36, they were continually clearing ground for more cropland. So I'm sure this area was cleared at this time. Also, I'll mention there was an area west and north of here when they moved here. Was an open area that a lot of trees were blown down from a severe storm of some kind. That's noted in some of the local history also. Then the rest of the material pretty well came from on the farm. All the lumber came from this farm. At that time, the Schumacher sawmill, operated by John Schumacher, was where a lot of the lumber was sawed, and the rest of it was hewn. The lumber that is probably 6 inches and smaller was sawed in the sawmill. Everything else bigger than that was hewn with axes. The other material that also was obtained locally on the farm was stone for the downstairs foundation walls. Also, they needed to have lime for mortar. So I'm guessing that they also built a lime kiln to supply themselves with lime, which they might have done that before when they built the house, we don't know. But you could not go to Bluffton or Pandora and go buy bags of lime or whatever. You had to produce it on your own. So they probably built along Riley Creek somewhere a lime kiln to burn limestone rock to make mortar and plaster. Another material they would have needed would be sand. So sand would have been obtained from sandbars in Riley Creek. When you have curves and that sort of thing, you have sandbars forming. So by skimming that sand off, you can obtain sand for making your mortar, which is basically lime and sand with the water mixed with it. Question?
Just a comment on that. Along Riley Creek in Bluffton, there's the remains even now, if you look real hard, of an old lime kiln, as I understand it. I had to go along, there was an old picture from 1950s, I think that maybe the Historical Society had, that I looked for that and was able to find it, but it's pretty much overgrown now.
That picture is in the town of the Fork of the Rileys, and that's a Seidel lime kiln.
Yeah, it's sort of along the Thurman Street in Bluffton, where it comes close to the road.
Another place was documented to have their own lime kiln, and that was on the Bridenbaugh farm, where our board member Dale Bridenbaugh lives. They had their own lime kiln there also, and they had a quarry right on the creek there for quarrying stone for foundation. So it's a similar situation there as to here. This was related to me by Dale Bridenbaugh. So it was not an unusual thing to have that sort of facilities, but it's something that is not talked about or are not very widely known about supplying stone, and especially for supplying lime for mortar and plaster.
You know, quite a few years ago, I heard, probably from you, that all the siding came from one walnut tree. Is that something you're affirming?
I'm affirming that. I was told that by Eugene Schwab, and I was also told that by Clarence Jones, who were both farmers here on the farm. Shingle like this, and smooth it down with a draw knife.
So the number of white oak shingles up here, 10,000?
I would guess at least that much or more, yes. Just to give you an idea. This would be probably a grandfather's job, somebody that wouldn't be able to get around very well, and this still was able to schnitz the shingles smooth like you see here. Basically, this is something you would not do on a barn raising day. You would do this when you're doing all your preparations for building a barn. Building a barn takes a lot of planning and preparation. Basically, you're starting out selecting your logs for your timbers and for siding, flooring, and all that sort of thing, which probably would start in the winter time. And then the trees would be cut in the winter time. They would be hauled to a sawmill, and if the sawmill is not functioning, they'd probably be stacked there ready till springtime, so you have enough water, in this case, to operate a water wheel. The sawmill in this case would have been operated by a water wheel called an undershot water wheel, which means the water goes underneath the wheel because there's not enough height of water to use for an overshot water wheel. Other things that had to be done was after the logs were sawed, You basically need to bring them to the site, and they probably used the old log barn to store a lot of this stuff in so it was out of the weather. Now there's a lot of pieces of wood that never made it to the sawmill because they were too big and too long for the sawmill to handle them. So basically those timbers would have been hewn out in the woods. That way all the scrap materials out in the woods is not on at your building site. Right here is a photograph typical of a crew that are hewing logs for timbers. And they're using two different tools. They're using a felling axe and a broad axe. These timbers here are typical of those. You'll see are using felling axes, and they're cutting out big chunks of wood. That's called the juggling process. And after they're done there, then there's a fellow down on the ground with a broad axe, and he is doing the final squaring up or shaping. Broad axe basically acts as a giant chisel, and you don't swing it like any other kind of an axe. This is a felling axe. Basically these marks right here are where this kind of an axe is chopped into the timber. And the way they know how far to chop is, there are chalk lines that are put on the logs so they know how far to chop their cuts to. And this is a broad axe, and it has an offset handle, and this is not swung like this is swung like this, and this flat side is always to the timber. There's a beveled side over here that is basically like a wood chisel. So that's the beveled side is away from the log, and when you're hewing, you'd stand like this and use strokes like this, guided by the chalk line going along the side of the log, so you create a straight line.
And I was here at a Fall Fest several years ago, standing here, and they asked what kind of wood this is on the flooring. And not only am I not an expert on wood, but
It's
this
a
is
little-
badly
yeah.
worn and wear and tear. What is this?
It's a little bit hard to...
The question does come up.
Yeah. I know some places they use some poplar, sometimes they use oak and ash. And it's a little hard without taking these up and cleaning up the wood, smoothing it up and looking at the grain of it to tell for sure.
In the actual construction of the barn, are we talking about barn raising? Could the Schumachers handle it? Who built this barn?
Before the barn was raised, you had weeks of previous work, cutting the timbers to proper length, putting in your mortise and tenon joinery before you even do a barn raising. The barn raising is the final stage in the building of a barn, and there's a lot of work that goes on before that. I'll mention some other things, like all the flooring had to be done. Section of flooring like we have here in the barn. It's from another barn, but it's the same style of flooring as the original part. And it has two grooves on it and a spline. This is a Cadillac barn flooring that you will find in this community and other communities. Other types of flooring might be this thick that they only have battens on the underside, or they might have 2 layers of 1-inch flooring that overlap the joints. So this is the most labor-intensive type of floor to make, and this is a tool that's used to make these grooves right here in the wood. This is called a plow plane. It's upside down right now so you can see the cutter on it.
Say a word, how long did it take to construct a barn of this size? It's a sizable barn.
I mean, after you have everything cut?
Yeah.
Okay, you might work a couple of weeks at putting all the framing together for the area from the floor down below here. Everything below the floor, from the floor below, was assembled first, and then the upper part was set up, and it was set up in sections. If you look at the barn, you'll see framing that goes across the width of the barn here. All these posts and beams and braces. And those are called vents. And after the flooring was set down, those were assembled on the floor here on top of each other. And basically, they start setting down the sections of framing at that end and piled them up so that the top section was at this end down here, and they would have raised the end down there first and then moved this way when they erected the barn. And they erected all these sections up using poles, ropes, probably used horses and other things to pull things in place. And then the beams on either side that the rafters are set on, after these sections were set up in place, then those beams were put in place and tied all these sections going across the widths together. The reason I know that that part was down there at the west end was done first is because when you look at this one beam up here that holds the rafters up, there's a scarf joint up there where the two pieces are lapped together. Laps over that part over there, so that means that beam over there had to be put in place before the rest of it was put in place. So that's how we figure out what the sequence was of setting it up.
If I go directly east here, 2 miles, there are 3 or 4 barns that have hex signs on them, or decorative objects. Would the Mennonite pioneers in the 1850s have used them?
I've never seen any pictures of barns in the community that did that. As far as hex signs or anything else like that, the only decorative things that traditionally they did here in the Swiss community was have owl holes in the gable ends of the barn. And that would be a sort of a diamond-shaped, trying to think of the term we need to use, a compound diamond-shaped opening and gable ends, and usually you had about 3 of them in each gable end. And there still are some barns existing in the community that have owl holes in the gable ends of the barn. One barn just west of here, and that would be the barn is being taken down that previously was owned by Samuel Bixel, who was a son of Abram Bixel, who owned this barn at one time. That barn is being taken down, and if the boards aren't removed yet, you can still see the owl holes on the east end of that barn. Plus there's about 4 other buildings around that still have owl holes on them.
Why don't we move a little bit to the use of the barns? How was the barn here used? What happened up here where we stand?
Okay, up here is for grain, hay, implements, tools only. No livestock was kept upstairs in a 2-story barn like this. It's all downstairs. Where you're sitting now is part of the hay mow. A hay mow in here does not consist of a loft and a 2-story barn. It basically means that's where the hay is stored, not a hay loft. Around 1883, and basically he just came down the stream from another farm over on Bentley Road, which was his family home place. And the barn, the second barn there was built in 1851, which is prior to this barn, and it is a typical Pennsylvania Swiss-style barn, which this barn is not. So when he came here, he probably decided he was going to do a couple things like update the barn so he could use a hay trolley system. And the way the barn was set up originally, he can't use a hay trolley system very well. So that's why he took the banks away from either end, made a big bank over here, closed the big doors up, moved the old doors over to this side, created hay chutes, took out the walls. There were walls all along here called waste walls. It doesn't mean they're waist high, it means so you don't waste grain. He also, I'm thinking, probably built a shed to the north of the barn on the west side. Some of our photos show a shed there, show a shed to the north of the barn. And I'm guessing he used a lot of the lumber that he tore out of here in remodeling for building that shed over there. You'll see one joist up above here. There were 4 more up above here in this area. There were 5 over there to create what they call scaffold lofts. This is a timber frame terminology now. And those areas would have been used for storing fodder, lumber, that sort of thing, but not usually hay.
To use the trolley system, they would have had to take out beams all the way
Right.
across here, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, they took
Say a
out
word.
3 of them. This is one of them right here that was cut out almost to the top of that post. They took out 2 others, and where they disappeared to, we don't know. So that also presented a problem, it presented a weakness in the roof support system.
we grew up, some of us grew up with this track system up there. Up there is a sling to take hay up in the bow, but there are also there's a grappling hook over here that was used, and also harpoons there.
Yeah.
When did that those items come into use?
Probably, I'm guessing in the 1870s and 80s. That's when the hay trolley system came into use. I think the hay trolley system was invented a little bit before that, but that's about when those items came into use also.
And how did they bring hay into the barn before that?
They would have brought that in with hay wagons, and it would not have been wagons like these. It would have been wagons with wider beds with racks on both ends to carry the hay in a larger volume than you could with a grain box.
And then they just pitched it out into,
Well, here they would have pitched it out over here and over on that side. On that side was hay mow also from the granary on to the west end. And then they would have had 4 ladders up here. There's one partially existing hay ladder and the other 3 been tore out. If you look up above here on this post, you'll see a series of holes vertically drilled into that post, and that's from where there was a hay ladder there.
So there was that kind of a ladder in 4 or 5 places. That's a good
4 places,
photo.
yeah.
4 places.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the bank here was not always there.
Right, that was put there, I'm guessing, in the middle to late 1880s, probably under Abram Bixel's supervision to update the barn. Basically, that's the amount of dirt from both of the banks that were at either end when it was built. Yes,
That means that when they were putting hay into this mow area,
yeah.
that it could go almost as high as the ceiling.
Well, it was up to those joists up there, yeah, or a little higher, yeah.
Because the ladder is at least
Yeah, they didn't have to pitch it up higher than that because they didn't have any equipment to move it higher mechanically, so that was all Armstrong work.
I'm struck with.
Over
So-
to the north here is a lean-to or an add-on here down below. It looks like a lean-to, and that was used how?
Down below, looks like they could have had hogs in there because of that small hole. They could have had sheep in there, it's sort of a
But
guess.
right up here, that door could be opened,
Yeah.
and we look straight out to Bixel Road.
In the one threshing picture we have, it shows that door open where they're threshing out to a straw stack out there when Abram Bixel was farming here. So I'm guessing Abram Bixel is responsible for that lean-to on the back also.
So a wheat separator would, a huge machine would be brought right into the barn,
Right?
and like the photo shows, a long pulley attaches to the steam
Yeah, and a
engine
belt,
out there
yeah.
and runs it. And the horses draw the wagons into the
Yeah.
barn, and they
They
stay in the
would've-
barn?
Yeah, they would have come up in here and probably unloaded, and then they would have run the wagons back by hand and then turn the horses around after the wagons were run out.
And put the horses out soon,
Yeah.
hopefully, yeah, for obvious reasons. Okay, is there anything else you'd wish to say about the kind of unique configuration of 2 banks at one time, and then that was pretty unique in Ohio, or at
That
least
was very
northwest
unique,
Ohio.
yes.
I have one question about structure. This barn has mostly horizontal siding.
Yes.
Is that typical?
That is not typical. Most barns built at this period had vertical siding. And
Can you think of a
basically,
reason why they would have?
I guess he liked horizontal siding because it's almost an exact duplicate of what was on the house. One other barn in the community did have horizontal siding like this and banks at each end, and that is the Neuenschwander barn, which is currently on Columbus Road, Bluffton Road, just right next to Cool Road on the south side. And right behind Phil, there's a picture of that barn.
Keith, can you explain why these barns didn't have paint originally? Or were they painted?
A lot of them were not painted originally and were painted later. My own barn, from pictures I have, my barn was not painted until it was recited about 1929. It shows it unpainted. Now our earliest pictures of this barn show it being painted with a white paint, which basically is probably made from possibly a white lead oxide paint. I'm not sure. It could have been a lime paint, but probably lead oxide mixed with linseed oil and turpentine. And a lot of farmers bought the ingredients and mixed up their own paint at that time. And then when we get to the pictures of where Abram Bixel owned the barn, it looks a dark color. So basically that means that probably Abram Bixel decided to paint the barn red. You can't tell the color for sure on a black and white photo, but practically nobody painted barns black back then. It was either white or it was red. The reason for painting barns red instead of white is the materials are cheap, they're easy to mix up and apply. Basically, you'd buy kegs, 100-pound of red oxide pigment in a powder, and you mix that with linseed oil and turpentine, and you have your paint. Some of the records the Society has from the Hauenstein drugstore at the turn of the century, you could still buy those kind of painting supplies at the drugstore, for instance. So anyway, and iron oxide was a cheap pigment also, and it was a durable pigment. So anyway, it was painted red sometime in the 1880s, I'm guessing, according to the pictures I see of the barn when Abram Bixel family lived here.
I mean, key, what are, say, a half dozen essentials that we ought not fail to mention?
Of course, the date, 1854. Also, the unusual floor plan where we have two banks at one at each gable end. Another one could be the horizontal siding, which is unusual. And also the fact about the walnut siding from one tree. Also, one thing you need to be careful about is also the safety factor in here in the barn also.
What would they be?
Well, you got some cracks here, you got some holes and that sort of thing, and stairway areas to watch out for, which basically really need to be have some repair done to them.
Of course, kids like to crawl through holes where you
Right.
throw hay down and so on.
Right.
Okay, these are good questions all. Is there one more before we close?
I should say also the barn was recited around 1936 after the Jones family lived here. The Jones family lived here from about 1924 to 1936, and after they left, then the barn was recited with the siding you see now, and that's called a cove siding, and I'll show you a piece of that. This is the style of siding that is on the barn now, and this is a pine siding. That's a cross section there.
So the siding on now is not the original?
No, the original was tore off about 1936, and this is what was put on.
And this part down here would overlap that
Right.
part there.